Welcome, everyone, to episode 5 of the LDRship Podcast, where our disagreements inform your decisions. My name is Will Atkins. I'm joining you from the left. I'm joined by Brett Miller from the right and Dion Dixon bringing in the Libertarian view. And this week we're talking about polarization and the media. And, the whole purpose of this podcast is for us to have civil conversations. None of us really agree with each other on policy positions, but that doesn't mean that we can't all get together and have some civil discourse and try to get to the bottom of some of these complex issues. So, Dion, what are we doing? Media and polarization today.
Well, so first. Thanks, Will. First, I want to just take a couple of seconds to address what happened last week. So last week, if you hadn't tuned in, we talked about the economy, and Will was not with us last week because he was off stumping for his candidate, which is awesome. I think that's great that we have at least one person who is actively involved in the politicking process. And like I said last week, even though we may disagree on policy issues and stuff, we still wished Will the best of luck and continue to wish him the best of luck in his endeavors in what he's doing right now in support. So Will got the opportunity to rebut and give his position after the fact. And one of the first things he said was, I can't believe the Libertarian said that he thinks that government should do away with this solution and impose his solution. That seems very anti-libertarian. And so if that message came across from me, then there was an error in transmission, and that is not what I intended to say. Of course, the Libertarian point of view and my own personal point of view is that the government should simply step out of it, period, and allow people to choose the best option for themselves. If something like Social Security was an option that they wanted to choose, I think it's great to have that option available for people to choose if they want it. But I also don't like that any government solution would be compulsory to anybody. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that clarification out. Brett, was there anything that you wanted to throw out there before we get started?
No, it's kind of the same point, right? Because I know you and I were in agreement on a lot of things last week in terms of that. And yeah, that's at least my standpoint as well. I can't speak for all the Republican Party, but I'm in agreement with that as well, to where I just don't like it being compulsory. If there's an option for it, fantastic. But that should also mean we get to opt out of it if we choose. If we're better at managing our money and our own retirement, then we should have that option. Because, again, we kind of got diverted onto government spending. We got a little far off of government involvement in the economy, but obviously people's money is a big part of that. Before we jump into tonight, though, I do want to point out we are down one of our co-hosts. Miss Thea is not here with us tonight, so we don't want to forget about her. So she'll have a chance to hop on here and do her rebuttal or her not an episode after we get done with this too.
And what's nice about this format is that even, as the 3 or 4 of us are in the heat of the moment, trying to make our points and explain kind of the positions of our various ideologies. Sometimes we don't come across the way that we want to, and having the ability to kind of rewatch or watch it after the fact and add in points afterwards. As Dion had said, that put me at an advantage perhaps. But without this kind of discourse, none of this is happening. So imagine, if we're having this kind of difficulty with this kind of civil discourse, imagine just everyday people trying to make similar points,
Exactly. And I think that segues very nicely into our topic for tonight. As Will mentioned, we're talking about polarization, media bias, the media's role in the polarization of America. So I'm not sure, do either of you guys have a firm place where you wanted to start? Otherwise, I'll launch into some of my notes that I have here.
I don't necessarily have a firm spot. I definitely have some thoughts around it, but Dion, go for it.
Okay. I'm gonna try something here. We'll see if it works. I've never tried sharing the screen on this, so I'm gonna see if I can share this. and see if you guys can see it, and hopefully the viewers can see it. So hopefully what you're looking at here is the all sides media bias chart. And I actually posted to social media recently about allsides.com. We are not sponsored by allsides.com, although if they did choose to sponsor us, we would be very happy with that. But allsides.com is a website that tries to pull news from, as they say, all sides of the political spectrum. And so the chart that I'm showing here is a very simplified chart. They tried to pull sort of the biggest media outlets in mainstream media and kind of put this on this spectrum from left to right. And I just wanted to show that to people so that if you're viewing this, you can see where your typical go-to news source lies on this spectrum. They also have on this page, you can learn about how they rate these, and how they got to, oh, this one is right leaning or center or left or whatever. For those of you that are only listening, I will put the link to this in the show notes so that you can at least click on it if you're just listening to it and can't see it. So, all right, let's go back to our beautiful faces. And so I think that I was really trying to find historically, did we have good data on the biases of, say, like the old news outlets, right? Because way back in the day, when the three of us were very, very young, there really was no like cable news. There was no 24/7 news cycle. What we had was ABC, NBC, CBS, right? And we had the Washington Post and the Times and the Wall Street Journal, that kind of stuff. And I was having a very hard time finding any kind of source that had any kind of credible rating of where these sources sort of stacked out left, right, center. And I think that it's probably because on the whole, I would imagine that mainstream media before the 24/7 news cycle tried very hard to be less opinionated. I feel that they tried really hard to be more fact based, and I think what happened with the advent of the 24/7 news cycle with cable news is, by and large, there just is not enough news in 24 hours to keep viewers' attention. And so you have to fill that with material that will keep viewers' eyeballs on the TV screen. And I think what they found out works is when you have the very charismatic and talkative and sometimes loud hosts who do their own shows where they do talk about the news, but I think a lot of their appeal is the method of delivery and the way that they opine about the different topics. And I think that kind of gave us sort of what we have now, where once people started introducing their own opinions into the news cycle, I think what happens is that's when you start having that split, and people start going left and right because they start reporting on their own feelings rather than just what the facts were.
So I like the all sides, so for the folks that are just listening in, the all sides chart that Dion threw up lists all of the news agencies from left to right. And I agreed with where they are. I prefer the 2-dimensional list, because not only from left to right, but then there's a vertical component that that deals with fact-based reliability, that sort of thing. Because on the one dimension, when certain news agencies are in either the furthest left or the furthest right category, one-dimensionally they look equal. But if you add in the second dimension of fact-based and reliability, there's a decent difference. So there's a relatively common one that's out there, and and I'll go ahead and bring up Fox News because I'm sure at some point we're going to have to talk about that today. And in the vertical component, Fox News, and I'll compare it to CNN. CNN is much higher on the fact-based reliability. They're equally left and right from each other, but they're not equal vertically.
Will, can I ask? I think I know the chart that you're talking about. I think I've seen it before too. But what I don't know is, do you know how they actually do those rankings as far as credibility?
Yeah, so I'm on the site now and I'm looking for their methodology, and I'll keep looking at it as we go through the podcast here tonight. But essentially, it's fact-based reporting is at the top, and then a mix of fact reporting and analysis. Further down, it's wide variation in reliability, and then at the very bottom is just opinion. But I'll keep looking at that, and I'll throw the link in the chat for you too. But yeah, and then the only other point that, again, because I'm sure we're going to end up talking about this, is when I don't know, let's say there's a lawsuit against Fox News for one reason or another, and they make an argument that says that they're an entertainment channel, not a news channel, and that no one watching their station could reasonably believe that they're a news channel because they're entertainment. And they're not Comedy Central. They're not entertainment as one might think of it. So it's difficult for me to make comparisons between something like Fox News and, let's say, CNN, based on. Now,
I wonder, Will, on that example that you just gave,
yeah.
I'm not familiar with the lawsuit, but I'm trying to steelman their argument here. Did they claim that the entire channel was entertainment, or did they claim that the specific show in question was entertainment? And that kind of goes back to my statement about how they had to fill the time with stuff that wasn't necessarily news.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I will find that for us, because that is an important distinction. If they're arguing that Hannity, as an example, is entertainment and not news, okay, that's one thing. But if they're arguing that the Fox News channel is entertainment, then that's something.
It's if your name is Fox News,
and I will say, I mean, but this is from the left. Again, I will go find out those details for us. And often what we talk about has nuggets of truth in it, but it's not the whole truth, right? And if the nugget of truth is that it's actually Hannity's show that's considered entertainment, but what it gets construed as on the left is that Fox News is entertainment. Those are two very, very different things. But yeah, on the left, it's very much considered faux news or fake news or whatever, because the understanding is that in this lawsuit, Fox News says we're an entertainment channel. You can't hold facts against us. But while we're talking, I'll look it up.
Hey, Brett, since Fox News, as I was doing my research, it seems like overwhelmingly Fox News is the go-to source for Republicans for their news. Do you want to speak on that at all?
I mean, I can. This is probably one of those, I may not be the best Republican when it comes to this. Honestly, I don't watch the news. It's been a choice of mine probably for a better part of 15 years that I haven't had cable or standard television in my house, because the majority of it for me is just negative information, right? If I want to go get information, I will go seek it out for sources that I know will give me those unbiased opinions. And honestly, a lot of times when I go to look at information, I'll pick from both sides, because there is usually a kernel of truth in either perspective that you get. And so you're trying to gain that whole story. But I mean, yeah, there you can definitely gather information from Fox News, and a lot of my friends that are Republicans, I talk to them, and that tends to be a primary source that they will go to, at least if they're watching something. I said, from my personal opinion, I prefer other sources to gather information from because, yeah, Fox News can be entertaining to watch. Just depends on what you're kind of after with that. But no, probably the point that I would make in terms of looking for information and gaining information, a bias that I often see, and this is not a right or left thing, but it's just definitely a understanding the system. I mean, because we've seen this huge shift, right? Dean, you kind of pointed this out with the 24-hour news cycle, with the rise of cable news and talk radio and all these influences that have come there, but then also political ads, right? Starting as, I think, right around the 1960s, we started having political ads. And when you start to put in the economic incentive for partisanship into that, you remove the bias right there, because if somebody's paying you to voice a side, well, guess what? You're going to voice that side. You're no longer neutral in that capacity. And I mean, we've seen that. I mean, I think anybody who's watched the news in general realizes that the news is very much about that shock value, that, what can we grab attention with? It's that breaking news kind of mentality, because let's admit it, as humans, we don't necessarily have the longest attention span when it comes to factual, boring information, right? It may be boring, it's very important, but it's still boring, right? And so when you have outlets that are trying to pull in ratings and things, and especially with the shift that we've seen to digital media and social media, where your success is measured mainly in terms of clicks, well, then the outrageous beats the sober almost every time, right? So you're going to have that. And so that's where you start getting more into the opinions and editorials, where it used to be in a newspaper, you could go and you could get the factual information, and even from the news, like that was on TV, you could get factual information, but then you had the op-eds, right, where you could go and get a different opinion or have that editorial aspect put into it, and you could take in that information. But now we're in a realm, especially where algorithms are running left and right from different social media platforms and even search engines that are out there, to where now you start getting thrown into the polarization and the echo chambers, to where whatever you look at most continues to fill your feed. So you don't ever get input from other perspectives. And that's what I think causes the real issues with the influence of the media, is that they're more interested in profit than they are with actually sharing truth, right? Yes, obviously there's some truth that's out.
Hasn't that always been the case, though? I mean, so ABC back in the day, or CBS or NBC, always wanted to make a profit, right? They were a business first and foremost. Probably the only media outlet that is not a business first and foremost is NPR, right? Or PBS. But everything else, their primary goal is to make a profit. So,
well, slight argument with you on that, Dion, because in all honesty, even a nonprofit is trying to make profit. They just categorize it different in the tax season.
Yeah. Okay. Fair point. But is it something? So I wonder if we went and talked to our parents or our grandparents, would they tell us, and would they be right in saying that by and large the news and the media, 40 years ago, 50 years ago was far less biased, and they were more concerned with telling you the truth, and that their business model was to be the most respected and most honest, and that's how they got your attention? Or was it really not? Are they looking at the past with rosy glasses?
So,
and go ahead.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. So newspapers, between 50 and 100 years ago, were partisan. It was, the Tallahassee Democrat was the Democratic newspaper. The Tampa Bay Republic was the Republican. Like they were partisan, and they were just as bad by their standards of that day as we are today with social media and Fox News and everything else. And they decided that rather than splitting their profits in half by only speaking to half of the public, that they would try to be more balanced and therefore, speak to everybody and increase their profits that way. And I don't know at what point individual stations or outlets have decided, if I can just hammer this 10% of the electorate or this 20% of the electorate, as long as I can capture them, I will make plenty enough profit. The other thing that I would bring up, though, is that I taught political science for a long time, and we teach this particular lesson. And, I would always ask my students, what percentage of the public do you think watches Fox News? What percentage do you think watches CNN? And people are like, 80% of Republicans watch Fox News, that sort of thing. And what I would always have to bring out is that these cable stations, most people in America don't have cable. So they don't have Fox News. They don't have CNN. They don't have a lot of these MSNBC. They don't have it. So when you start actually breaking out the numbers, Fox News is number one, but it's at like 11 or 12%, and then you've got CNN and MSNBC behind them at 7, 8, 9, 10%, something like that. So it's when we're actually talking about the electorate, it's Fox News is the biggest cable station, but it's still not reaching that many people. But the people that they are reaching, and the same for MSNBC and CNN, the people that they're reaching are the more active, the more vocal people within that sectorate of the electorate.
Yeah. And from a business perspective, I can agree with that, because knowing that with running business, it's, one of those little quips that you throw out there. I don't know if the pronunciation's right, but we say that riches are in the niches, right? When you can really, niche down to find that area, you connect with people better because you're speaking directly to them. And I think that's the same thing with the news media, is they do that. But now we also, not only have journalism in that aspect, but we have the whole blogosphere, right? Everything that surrounds that, and that every person with a camera is all of a sudden a journalist and can post on whatever social media platform that's there. But the issue you run in there is that there's no vetting of information. And so you have this massive spike of opinions, right? Which can often lead to a spread of misinformation on one side or the other.
Wait, are we part of the problem now?
As Brett was saying that, I was like, hold on, we're anyone with a camera.
No, absolutely. Right. I mean, absolutely. And I mean, that's where, having those conversations, that's one of the things that we had talked about when we first started this podcast, is that we don't want to just come in here and start blasting opinions. We want to be able to back things up with as facts as much as possible, so that we can actually give people the chance to look up. And that's one of the things I always encourage people that I talk with. Like, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you stand on. You need to have an element of critical thinking to be able to look at something, evaluate it, but also research it, right? Don't just take somebody's opinion for it. And I would hope that the people listening to this, it's the same thing. Don't just take our opinion for it. You need to go and do the work and do the research to find that out. And I think that's honestly one of the issues that we have with kind of the general American populace. People are busy, right? Their days are filled. And so they don't have the time to sit down and research and do these things. And unfortunately, they start living on sound bites.
But
right? And that's
I was going to say, but in my experience, they're busy doom scrolling, right? So
I said busy, not productive.
If they took that time to actually scroll and look for the information that they really need, rather than just like scrolling through TikTok dances, maybe we'd be better off. But I don't know.
Now you're getting into the mental health crisis in America, and how TikTok dances is what keeps people going every day. No, but to Brett's point, I mean, if the riches are in the niches, when NBC, ABC, CBS, and Broadcast Fox are all fair and balanced and all saying the same thing, there's nothing to keep someone from flipping the channel and getting the exact same thing from another channel. So there was no loyalty there. Whereas when you niche down, but
people had their Walter Cronkites and their what was the other guy's name? I'm drawing a blank now. It'll come to me. Stossel, Johnson. Yeah, Jennings. Yeah, those guys. They had their like favorite personality. So I guess that was what they relied on maybe at that time to bring in the audiences. Ted Koppel. That was the other name
Yeah.
I was trying to remember. Okay, so going back a little bit, Will, you mentioned the viewership of like Fox News and CNN and stuff, and if we were to combine all of those, it sounds like we're talking about maybe a third of the populace is watching those cable news outlets. But I think that, at least anecdotally, it seems like more than a third of the populace is extremely polarized right now. And so where is the polarization of the rest of the populace coming from? Is it social media? Is that is now driving everybody apart?
So, I mean, that could be. So while we were talking, I was looking it up. So 40% of people have a cable subscription. So 40% of households. So, and that makes, about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third have cable television. So where's the rest of it come from? Is it from social media and the silos that are created there? Or is it just the 33% to 40%? And that's just all we hear about. Therefore, we think everyone is polarized. I don't know.
I mean, I'd probably say it's a bit of that because you do tend to have a minority that sort of leads the way with things. It's like you look at American history. This is kind of a fun one, right? The American Revolution, the Revolutionary War, where you look at the actual population that made a difference in terms of changing the tide of the war and all that stuff, it was 3%. Because roughly 50% of the colonists still sided with the British. Right. And there was a good 25 to 30% that abstained from it because they weren't sure where to go and they didn't want to lose their homes. But when you actually came down to the fighting force and what changed the tide, it's 3%. Right. So it's not a big number. So I think a lot of the times we see the polarization out there because, Will, you kind of pointed out, it's the people that are the loudest. Right. And unfortunately, the people that are loudest aren't always the most right. They just have the biggest mouth, not always the wisest opinion. But we tend to see that. But I do think that social media has played into a lot of it, and not just social media, but I think, Will, to your point, with only 40% having a cable subscription, again, a lot of people don't watch standard news, right? If anything, they're going to go to Google and they're going to search something up. And that was one of my points earlier. When you look at the search media, and you understand how SEO works, right? Search engine optimization, that you pay for the top hits, right? You know how to get your numbers up there. And my point with that is, Dion, you had asked me if I'd had a chance to watch the Trump-Rogan interview. And I hadn't, but I was curious about it, right? So I go to search it. But then as I search it, the top hits, right? You go through this, and it's the New York Times, The Hill, Newsweek, CNBC, NPR, BBC, CBS News, MSNBC, The Guardian, NBC News, CNN. Like, this is all the top hits that pop up there, right? And so
they all paid to have their opinion piece about his appearance on Joe Rogan appear at the top of your Google search. That's what you're saying?
And if you understand human nature with that, most people never go past the first page of a Google search. Right. So they're going to take that top bit, and whether it is accurate, whether it is unbiased, none of that matters. Right. That's what they're going to see. So that's what they're going to be drawn into. And that's where I was saying to where people need to have more of a critical mind to see things, because, and honestly, I read all the top ones because I'm like, okay, I want to see what's there. And honestly, they're all very biased in their opinions. I think I came across one relatively factual, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. All the rest of them, within first 3 to 4 sentences, you could already tell what direction it was going. And again, that goes for both sides. And so I
think it's important, since we're on the topic of Google and search engines, I think it's important to point out a couple of things. One is that your search history and patterns also plays a part in what shows up at the top as well. And so it kind of goes into this echo chamber that we've sort of been skirting around, where if you're kind of maybe right of center or left of center leaning when you sort of start, Google's going to start learning what you're searching for, and it's going to give you more of that. And so if you start just right of center, you may end up far right within a year, or if you start just left of center, you may end up far left, just because it's going to start driving you further and further towards those things that you like. And then also, I think it's important, and I taught very briefly in high school, and I had to point out to my high school students that Google is a search engine, not a truth engine. And so a lot of times they would be like, oh, well, let's just look it up on the internet. And they'd pick the first thing that Google popped up and they'd be like, see, it's true. And it's like, whoa, not everything on the internet is true. And definitely not everything that Google finds for you is true. So it's not a truth engine, just a search engine.
Yeah, and that's where I was saying having that critical mindset is really important to be able to go through and form your own opinions from the information. Because you're right, Deanna, it's like so often we search out information and we end up with this confirmation bias of things that we already think we believe. And whether they're true or not, we tend to believe them. And then when we're confronted with opposing viewpoints, like immediately our walls go up and we're just not open to talking about that because, oh, it's the other side. And I think that's really unfortunate because there is perspectives that we can gain from people just through conversation, right? Just like what we're doing here, being able to have these kind of conversations and talk through this stuff. This is really what's going to make our country better.
Yeah. And I don't, in a purely selfish or self-centered way. I mean, I still think I'm right. Correct. I still think I'm correct. When we get into policy discussions. But if I don't understand where you're coming from, I don't have a way to either disprove what you think or to persuade you to my side if I don't understand where you're coming from. But then you also have to have the ability to recognize when you're like, well, I actually don't have a counter argument for that. It doesn't mean that you still can't believe what you believe. It doesn't mean that you still can't vote the way you want to vote, but you should be able to recognize that, this opinion that you had that you thought was airtight. Okay, maybe it's only like 90% airtight. It's not 100% airtight,
Yeah, it's funny you say it like that, Will, because when you talk about we're always right, you think about it, you're always right? You're never wrong except for about a split second. Right? Because you're right up until the point you get new information and then you change your opinion and now you're right again.
Now I'm right again 90% of the time. No, to that point. So, what we were talking about earlier in this episode about the, Fox News, not, entertainment versus news and all that. So I've been researching while we've been talking and everything. And it was interesting to me and it makes total sense. The other piece we haven't talked about yet is the what is it? The equal time rule type thing that broadcast television got rid of, Reagan era, I think. And for me, I'd always been like, well, just put that back and then we'll be fine. But part of what I kind of uncovered while I was looking here was that even if we brought it back, it wouldn't apply to cable news because cable news isn't even regulated by the FCC because it's subscription based, and the FCC has very little ability to mandate what cable channels do and say. So that even just that was like, oh, okay, this is it's an even more complex and nuanced problem than I thought it was, because I was one of the ones that was like, yeah, just bring back the equal time rule and then we're all good. Then Fox News would have to give equal time to left-leaning people.
So that is a great segue, Will, into how do we solve this? And I think it apropos that you brought up the FCC and regulations that at least we used to have, and maybe should still have by your opinion. So are you ready to launch into what you think the solution to this polarization issue is, and what we can maybe do to fix it?
I mean, we certainly can, right? And it's the FCC regulates things. So I'm going to imagine that you're going to say we should get rid of the FCC and let the market decide. And but to be honest, I
for those of you just listening, Brett was shaking his head.
Yeah, don't get rid of it. It may need some changes, but don't get rid of
it. In general, that's where I fall as well. The FCC is not perfect. I think that there needs to be some sort of punishment for whoever is knowingly lying on the air.
How do you prove knowledge, though? How do you prove that, and intent? How do you prove that they're knowingly lying versus they are telling you what they think is true now, and then it turns out later that it wasn't true?
And I think that's exactly what happened with the Fox News defamation suit against Dominion Systems, is that Fox News knew the people, Hannity and some of the other folks knew that what they were saying was not true when they said it. They had text messages and emails and stuff like that proving that. And that's why they ended up having to pay Dominion like $1 billion. But that was such a one-off, and it was, in my opinion, the only reason it got there is because of January 6th and the big lie and all that stuff. Like, I want to see that for smaller everyday things that, we never would have gotten to that point if this was kind of handled at a lower level, in my opinion.
So the COVID-19 lab leak theory that was initially shot down as, being xenophobic and racist, or the Hunter Biden laptop, right, which was Russian disinformation, Trump being a Russian plant, right, those kinds of things. So, I mean, to be fair, right, we're talking about the entire spectrum. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? So if we're going to hammer Fox News about Dominion, we should hammer CNN about, Russia collusion.
Yeah. And that's, so I have faith in our judicial system. And I know some folks are losing faith in our judicial system, but I think more times than not, it gets it right. I don't like to see people, one group of people being held to one standard while another group of people are being held to another standard. Like you said, good for the goose, good for the gander. If I did some of the things that I see around me, like, I would be in jail, but other folks are not. And so I do, no matter which side it's coming from, if people are knowingly lying, then they should be held accountable.
Now, I would throw out to you that our court system is extremely overburdened right now. And the right to a fair and speedy trial, the speedy part of it, is not so speedy anymore. So I am hesitant to further burden our court system with even more defamation lawsuits, especially because it seems like, and I was trying to do a lot of research about defamation, libel, and slander before we got into this, because that I think is going to be a symptom of the polarization that we have. And it just seems that in my brief little bit of research that I was able to do, basically the courts over and over again have shown that it is so difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was actually malicious intent, and not just somebody making an honest mistake or going with the information that they thought was true at the time and then later revealed was not true. It's just so difficult to prosecute a defamation case. And so the feeling that I got from my research was that most people just see that it is an extreme waste of everybody's time to do that.
And I mean, I agree. The courts are overburdened, and the length of time it takes is such that I think people take advantage of that, knowing that even if they are held accountable, the damage will be done. So, it's almost a weaponization of the length of time that it takes some of these cases to get resolved, because 2 or 3 years from now, when the case is actually resolved, the issue is so far in the past that it really doesn't matter. Oh, okay, you're right, I lied, our bad. But we got the result that we wanted 2 years ago. So yeah, 100%. I agree with that. And part of, and this is going to be my left-leaning bias coming out here. Part of why I say that I trust the legal system, and that good for the goose, good for the gander, is that I would expect, and I'm biased, but I would expect that the cases on the left, you brought up the Chinese lab, the Hunter Biden laptop, some of those sorts of things, when it went through the judicial system, would be found more often to be what they thought was true at the time, honest mistakes. And again, my left-leaning bias, but more so what we hear on Fox News is more purposely trying to rile up the base, purposely false, purposely clickbait, whatever.
Okay.
Acknowledging
Brett, what do you think?
Biased.
Brett, what do you think? What is your solution to all this?
Well, first off, you guys are going to spin me back around to a previous conversation about the morality of our society. Because when you don't have a strong moral foundation, you're going to have more people that are going to skirt the edges and try to get away with stuff like that. Again, that's not a government problem to fix. That's a society problem to fix. That's a neighborly thing that's getting involved with your families and friends and having actual real conversations. But in terms of the media stuff, I don't know is there's anything like a mandate, because again, we're going to get into the legislating morality thing, right? Because Will, to your point, with as slow as the process is, even if somebody gets a hand slap, they're like, oh, well, too bad. I got the response I wanted to when I wanted it. So I don't think that's where the change needs to happen. To really change this, it needs to be a mindset of the people. It needs to be more around understanding really media literacy, to where people are more critically thinking about stuff. I mentioned that earlier, but that's what it really kind of comes down to, is the people have to take ownership for themselves, right? I think, just looking at the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, right? You look at the 5 rights that we have in there that are given to us. Well, one of them is the ability to petition, right? To readdress the legal or the governmental system and say, hey, I don't agree with that. But the only way people will know to do that is if they have an awareness of it, and if they're actually paying attention to the world around them, and they're not so drowned out with entertainment and distractions. Right. So being able to truly teach people, I think we had this, I don't know if this was last week or the week before, when we talked about, the school systems and what we actually teach there, or maybe it was one of our side conversations. But like, there's a lot of things that are taught in school that I think are wholly unnecessary for survival in life. Right. Hey, you want to learn about Shakespeare? Take your own time to do it. Right. I know everybody knocks on Shakespeare because it's like the obvious one there, but there's so many other things that we could learn, from interpersonal skills to how to balance a checkbook for those that still use checkbooks. But it's just that whole idea, like, what are the life skills that are there? Well, I think one of those really is teaching people how to critically evaluate things that are around them, from their news sources to making sure that they can identify biases, to knowing how to cross-check information that can actually help them navigate the complex media landscape that we have out there in front of us. And by encouraging individuals to seek out diverse viewpoints, that's where we're going to really be able to mitigate some of the effects we have of polarization.
Brett, let me ask you this. So civics education has kind of gone away from our public school education. And when folks talk about bringing it back, you start getting into like, well, what civics are you going to teach, and from what angle? And do you think, so let's say we bring civics back mandatory. Let's say that there is, media literacy and how to cross-check information and things like that. Do you think that would be well received by either or both sides of the political spectrum?
This is another topic. We're kind of getting off the media side of things, but it's relevant, right? So, Will, with that, I don't know as anybody is really open to anybody proposing a change that's not their own idea, right? We're kind of stuck in that realm right now. This is, Dean and I were having this conversation briefly before we started this episode, but it would be fantastic if we had a third, a fourth, a fifth party in the political view, to where we really had to work together to figure these things out. But in this divided world where we're so incredibly polarized, I think it would be difficult. Because again, Will, you're going to have people that are going to want to lean into that bias, and they say, well, if a Republican came up with this campaign, then they're going to want to teach all the right wing stuff. And if a Democrat came up with it, it's all the left leaning stuff. And I think what we're talking about with this whole thing is we need to get away from the bias to where it's no longer opinion. Right now, of course, yes, I understand history is written by the victors. Got it. So there's always some bias that comes into even the history we teach. So for me, I recommend going back to original sources when we start looking at intent and things like that. I was down in Dallas this last week for work and had the opportunity to catch up with a friend of mine that's down there. And he's got connections with an organization called Wall Builders. Now, you guys might know Rick Green is the kind of one of the spokesmen for that. But there's a gentleman, David Barton, that has a personal library of documents from our founding fathers, from letters, journals, all kinds of stuff that his personal library rivals the size of the Library of Congress's amount of documents. And like, so that's the kind of stuff, like to go back and gather that information and build a curriculum based on that versus the opinions that we've had for the last 250 years on what we think people was there. That's just an example, but yeah, Will, I don't know if it really would be accepted by both sides. It would probably have to start somewhere. But I think helping people have a real education, teaching people how to think rather than what to think, is probably the best course of action we can take. You know, and I say that as a father of 4, that's what I do with my kids. I try to teach them in every situation how to think. I do my best not to push my biases on them. I know they'll probably pick some up just living with me, but I want them to form their own opinions. I want them to go out into the world and experience things and come up with their own ideas. And that can't be done with a forced curriculum.
So I think that we will have to talk about like public education and the American education system overall at some point in an episode, because that's a whole discussion unto itself, right? But I don't think that it is controversial to say that the American education system writ large has been captured by the left mostly. As far as public education and colleges and universities, I don't think that's a controversial take. And so I think if we're talking about introducing fair and balanced civics lessons, I think immediately you will have a clashing of heads there, because immediately the Republicans will say, well, the Democrats run all the schools, so what are they going to be teaching my kids? So
yeah, and I don't disagree. I mean, when you say the education system is captured by the left, I mean, I would agree that most of your teachers and professors and whatnot are left leaning. I think their argument, and certainly mine when I was one of those, is that we don't think that we're teaching from a bias, but we all have unconscious biases that I'm sure come out. So yeah, I would tend to agree that if we're going to stand up a civics, even just a media literacy and how to check your sources, people on the right are going to see that as people on the left are attacking right-wing media, telling their students, make sure you double check everything you hear on Fox News. Although I would agree with that, but okay, so. To try to bring it back, and I know education probably isn't. It's a different episode, right? But the last point that I kind of wanted to make with this media bias and just polarization within the electorate and whatnot is that there's this relatively infamous argument between two political scientists, Fiorina and Abramowitz, where one of them says there is no polarization in the electorate, but that the electorate have to choose between the two candidates on the left and the right, and the two candidates set themselves up so far to the outside that the people that are in the middle just have to choose these polarized people. And the opposite side of that argument is that the reason that the candidates set themselves up that far to the outside is because that's where the electorate is along the fringe. And I'd be interested to get to hear what you guys think about whether do we think that the electorate is a bell curve normal distribution where most people are in the middle, but they have to choose between, two polarized candidates, or are the candidates appealing to the people that are actually polarized themselves?
So here's my take on it. And I think it stems from two fundamental issues. I'm not going to necessarily call them problems, but I will call them issues in the way that our elections in the way that our politics works. So first of all, we have what the rest of the world calls a first past the post system, right? So it's whichever candidate got the most votes, even though the most votes may not be an actual majority, right? So you don't have to get 51%. You just have to get more than everybody else got. And so like in a primary, and that's the second issue, is our primary system. But in a primary, you are likely to have way more than two candidates in a primary. You're far more likely to have 5, 6, 7, right? So you can become the party's nominee by gaining only 20% of the votes, right? If there are 6 candidates for the primary and you got 20%, you probably won that. But what that means is that 80% of the people voted against you, right? And that is just fundamentally kind of a flawed way to pick anybody. And this shows up not just in the primaries, but in all of the elections that we have, right? Issue number one. And issue number two,
Dion,
the primaries.
before you go to number two, that's 20% of the people who voted in the primary, which is only 25% of the people that are eligible to vote. Therefore, I mean, you're talking about minuscule numbers of people voting for whoever becomes the nominee. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, and then again, this is great because you helped feed into my second point about primaries is the people who vote in primaries not only are a much smaller demographic of the overall population of the United States, but they also tend to be the party faithful, right? And so I think the party faithful tend to be more dogmatic in their beliefs about the very polarizing things that set the parties apart. And so in order to get the party nomination, you have to kowtow to the people who are going to vote in the primaries, who on the left are going to be much further left than center, and on the right are going to be much further right. And then all of that is public record, right? Like we see all of the primary debates, we see all of the interviews and everything that go on prior to each party picking their candidate. And so the people will have formed opinions about these candidates. And now as a candidate, you kind of you face that tough choice of, do I shift to the center to try to gather where I think most of America is? And does that look like I am now changing my position? Or do I kind of ride the train that I'm on and hope that I pick up people who are not necessarily as far left or right as I am coming across to win this primary?
Yeah, and that's I mean that is the kind of the quintessential issue. As a future politician myself, you got to go far enough to the left to make it through the primary, but not so far left that you alienate the middle, and then you're kind of left with what is left. And your point about first past the post. So it's called Duverger's law. The way that our electoral system is set up is such that we will only ever have two parties. A third party, just there's no, sorry for the libertarian here, but you will never win between if the Democrats and the Republican parties continue to exist. The libertarians will never be the first past the post, winner take all, single member district. They'll never win.
Right.
So people end up having, we hear a lot of, it's the lesser of two evils type thing. They would prefer perhaps the libertarian candidate, but they know if they want their vote to count, they have to choose between the lesser of two evils between the Democrats and the Republicans.
Yeah, I think something to consider too with that whole process is the emotional state of the people, right? When you look at this, because when issues come into play, like we all love to think that we are very logical in our approach to life and that we think things through. And honestly, we're not. Most of the time, we have an emotional knee-jerk reaction to something. And then after we process it for a minute, then we come up with the reasons logically why we did that, which is often called justification, right? You find the logic that backs up your emotion so that you seem like you're in the right position. Well, when you have that, that's what a lot of the politics do, is where it's kind of a chicken and the egg sort of situation, Will, with what you're asking, like, which one is it? I don't know if you can really answer that because it's a bit of both. Because I think as you continue to amplify partisan content, you're going to have these highly emotional, controversial, just sensational content ideas that get thrown out there, and that's the stuff that people go to because they have that like that initial knee-jerk reaction, right? And that's where you get this intense polarization among the people. But when we really break down to it, those emotional issues, there's probably what, 5 of them, right? But how many other issues do we really deal with as a country that we need to talk about, but we never do because it just gets smoke screened by all this emotional stuff? And that would be one of my big drives eventually with government, is kind of go back to the things government is supposed to do, right? What is it? Article 8, is that the right one? Where it lists out the enumerated powers of Congress, right? And they're only supposed to do the things that government is supposed to do, and leave the rest
Article
to the people.
1, actually.
Is it?
Our founding fathers thought that Congress was the most important, and so they made Congress Article 1 and the executive Article 2.
Is it Section 8 then of Article 1? Because I know there's an 8 in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's probably Section 8, yeah.
Yeah, Article 1, Section 8. But it's that whole idea. It's the 18 enumerated powers, right? Like, that's the stuff government really should be focused on, but we get into these emotionally divisive topics. Like, this is one of those that I was kind of hoping Thea would be on for part of this discussion because, just so people are aware of this, right? When you're talking about media and how things are put out there with folks, honestly, they're trying to create as much divide between me and Thea as possible, right? Because, if you're watching, you may not, or if you're listening, you may not know this, but I'm white, Thea's black, right? Obviously, I'm Republican, she's a Democrat, I'm male, she's female. Chances are, like, I know I'm Christian, right? Talking with Thea, I don't know for sure. I haven't asked her, but I'm going to guess that she's not from some of the comments she's made. So you look at all of those piece points. Like I said, I don't know, right? That's just an assumption on my part. I saw Will's face there because I don't know. I haven't asked her, right?
Yeah.
But the point being is, like, if that is the case, the media is doing everything they can to drive a wedge between us. And they're saying, hey, you aren't supposed to like each other. You aren't even supposed to talk to each other, let alone have a thought that might be the same. And that causes so many problems where it just builds up this whole us versus them mentality. And if you guys remember, early on in our podcast, my position on things is it's people first, right? We have to stand where it's life matters most. We have to remember that we're all humans. We're in this together. This is how we get along. Yeah, we may differ on points, but we have to be able to come together and talk through things, or none of us are going to survive this.
So, Brett, I think you kicked off a thought in my head that I had a little bit earlier. And, we keep talking about the media pretty much solely in the context of like news. But I think it's also important for us to talk about the broader aspect of the media, right? Television shows and movies, right? Again, I think it's a non-controversial take that there has been a lot of complaints about the wokening of Hollywood lately. Right. Whether you agree that it has become too woke or not, we can debate that. But there has definitely been a large outcry from people saying, all right, we get it. Right. Not every movie needs to have like the black, trans, gay, Muslim, that one person. Right. Like however intersectional you can get with your character. And so I think, when we talk about the polarization, it's important to remember that it's not just the quote unquote fact factories in the media that we're talking about. We also have to look at the fiction factories, right? Because they play a part too in the polarization that we see. So I don't know that we have time to even talk about that because we're coming up on an hour now. But I guess I throw that out there to say that, media is kind of everything, not just the news.
Yeah. And I think just to touch on it real briefly, I mean, much like you'll say that education is captured by the left, I think it's relatively not controversial that the entertainment industry is largely left leaning as well. And I think what you're saying or what you're picking up on is I think the left-leaning people in the entertainment industry are recognizing that certain groups have been underrepresented in film and TV and whatever else, and are therefore making a concerted effort to allow those folks to be seen, which is being seen, I think, from the right as like we're shoving it down your throat type thing. That, hey, I just wanted to watch this TV show and I didn't need to see XYZ, stop shoving it down my throat. And I honestly don't think that that's the intent of the folks on the left in the entertainment industry. But I can understand why people might feel that way.
Okay. I think that's I wish we might need to start making these episodes 2 hours long, but I don't think anybody's going to stick around with us for that long, if they even stick around with us for the full hour.
I can't run it on 4 times speed. I can only do 2 times.
But why don't we go around and talk about what's been making us happy this week? Brett, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So I wish I had written this down, because there was actually something I passed by. I think it was on my way back from Dallas on Friday. And I'm like, oh, that was a great thing. And I was trying to think of it. I was sitting here and I can't remember it. So come up with something else here that goes along with it. I know I kind of reference this a lot, but it's just been my travels the last couple of weeks, because being down in Dallas for, my job, the day job type stuff. I was there for that, but then I had a chance to connect with some of my business partners, and I'm just always thrilled to just meet people that are excited about their future, right? And the possibilities are there. Actually, while I was waiting to get steak with some of my friends, we went to a great place down in Dallas called Hard 8. You buy meat by the pound, right? Like that's how you do Texas barbecue, right? You buy it by the pound. But while I was there, I got into a conversation with 3 young gentlemen that were all between the ages of about 19 to 22. And they just kind of had their hustle on, right? Where they were looking for opportunities and they were looking to make their way in the future. And they all work in valet. So they're talking about nice cars and stuff like that. But it's just cool to see that people are, even amidst all where I guess we're at the age where we pay attention to more politics and the polarization and all that kind of stuff there. But just to see people that are still excited about their future, that always makes me happy.
I loved working valet back when I was that age. You meet some really cool people. I smoked a cigarette with Blues Traveler, just chilling because he was staying at that particular hotel. It was interesting.
Nice.
So my wife and daughter were traveling since mid last week, and things have been kind of hectic on the campaign trail for my particular candidate, and they just got back into town today, and I think as busy as I have been the last week, kind of all came rushing back a little bit once they were finally home. And my daughter, who's in middle school, she's at that age where she doesn't need dad as much, and she's too cool for school and all that kind of stuff. But she gave me like the biggest hug and was like, I missed you. And then for me, I was like, oh my, like I really missed you guys too. It was very heartwarming. And it was nice to have them back home. And that's what's been making me smile.
Awesome. Mine is on a very similar note. I know it's going to sound corny to our listeners and our viewers, but for me, what's been making me happy this week is my wife. Nothing particularly challenging or anything happened this week. It's not like, it's not like we just survived a hurricane or anything. But it's just the day to day. She is a solid rock, right? And no matter how chaotic things get, no matter how much I feel like I might be thrown around and tossed around, it is just so comforting to come home to her, and she's solid, and I love her so much, and we have a great partnership. She always seems to know exactly what I need and what to give. And I hope I do the same for her. But it is just it is so refreshing, especially when I see a lot of couples. They're like, oh, I can't believe what so and so, my wife or husband did, or what he's such a jerk, whatever it is, right? You see that, and yes, sometimes we get irritated with each other, but by and large, it's amazing to be partnered with a person who shares the same goal, which is we are going to do life together. And no matter what else happens, that is our goal, and I love it. So that's what's been making me happy this week.
That's awesome.
And with that, especially Dion's wife, make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure that you listen to this every week, because you never know who's going to get the shout out.
And everybody who is listening and watching, please stay tuned for Thea's rebuttal to this. I'm sure it will be fantastic, because she is a lawyer, and I am sure she can come up with some fantastic arguments. And then as far as next week's episode, as we're recording this, we are coming really close to the election. I'm not sure what topic makes sense to do right before the election, especially since it probably won't get published before election day. So we'll figure that out. But definitely after the election, that episode, we're going to do a post-mortem on whatever happened. And we will bring you our opinions and our analysis of what went right, what went wrong, and our opinions on all of that. So stay tuned. All right. We'll see you guys next time.
See you next week.